We're all the Panasonic GH6. GH6 is, it's you. If you're watching this, it's me. It's people who own the GH6. And what I mean by that is, it's a camera that you can't understand until you understand who you are. Who you are as a videographer, photographer, content creator. The GH6 is kind of an enigma. It's the camera we think about buying, but we never do. It's the camera we love to hate, we hate to love. It's the camera that people thought before it came out, we knew what it was all about, would take the M43 world by storm, but it never really got out of second gear. Micro Four Thirds gives its users in the M43 ecosystem a lot of validation. People who purchase goods in the M43 ecosystem are happy. It's money well spent most of the time. But with GH6, I find that there's a bit of a hole, there's a bit of a quest for validation that hasn't really been discovered yet. And I feel like if you own the camera, you want that validation, but you're still looking. And if you don't own the camera, you want to know the validation is going to be there before you buy it. And in a way, like, we all, if you're watching this, you're like me. You kind of experience the GH6 whether or not you own it. We all vicariously enjoy GH6 content. That's why you're watching this. That's why I binge watch the Red Thompson channel. I just watched a 40-minute video on the Red Frame Tech channel. And that video, that 40-minute video on a quite small channel, has 6,000 views in 2 weeks. This is for a camera that came out a year and a half ago. And this is a long-winded 40-minute video. People are hungry to understand what this camera means and to get closure on the Panasonic GH6. And we're still not there. I don't think we're ever going to actually be there. Is this going to be like, I don't want to say like the GH5S, but is this going to be like some sort of cult camera in years to come where, see, there's a disagreement on how many units they've sold. I don't think they've sold that many. I see far more people talking about not owning the GH6 than owning it. And it's just going to be the camera that, isn't produced in huge numbers, even though it was a really good camera. And in, say, 10 years' time, 15 years' time, people will actually seek them out because it'll be cool and trendy to have this amazing camera that people never really embraced when it was released. I don't want to get bogged down in the specs. I'm not going to talk about the autofocus because I find that fucking boring. And I don't know that you can really complete the discussion without going into that, but at the same time, I feel like you're missing out a lot on the sort of philosophical angle or the meditative experience of the GH6 if you get too deep into the weeds with the technicals. This is a camera that probably 99% of us don't really deserve. We haven't paid our dues on the cameras we already own before we go and take up 5.7K or 120 FPS at 4K. Or these insane, bit rates and video modes, and a lot of us don't even really need 10-bit video. And I think, this is why I say, like, we have to learn who we are before we can understand what this camera means to us. And so I feel like, a little bit of introspection of ourselves instead of obsessing over, megapixels and dynamic range and stops of IBIS and all of that is probably warranted, especially now since we've had that technical discussion threshed out for a year and it hasn't solved the dilemma. It hasn't got us any closer to, the general theory of everything when it comes to this camera. The grand unified theory of the GH6. It's one of those cameras where if you're out and look, I don't own one, but I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who does. You may be out in the street, got this big, hulking, kind of full frame sized, big DSLR sized camera, maybe with a big ass lens on it, and God help you if you've also got a cage and a side. Do they have a side handle for it? I forget. And you're just doing a bit of street photography, and you're walking past people who are just snapping away on their phones or whatever, and you've got this sort of $4,000, $5,000 kit. And I remember hearing someone, I totally forget the channel, but talking about how they felt kind of silly walking around with that level of kit in a lot of situations. And I kind of know how it feels like. Even the GH5, which is, I would say, a medium size, or a large medium size, or a large medium, or a smallish large camera, depending on how you want to phrase it. But you put a decent sized lens on it, and people know you've got a camera. You know what I mean? And people don't look at you the same as if you just were taking a photo on your phone, which no one pays any attention to. Or even if you just have like a little pocket camera, And I think most of us, we do have something like the GH5, and we kind of know how it's going to feel owning the GH6. And most of us, we don't have professional production companies, or we don't really earn a living off our photography. I use my camera for my work a lot, but it's kind of like a side aspect of what I do. I don't want to go into me, but I don't consider myself a professional photographer. I'm just a professional who happens to use a camera for some things. GH6, I think, is the camera we kind of dream about if we have some video project in mind that we've always wanted to do, and it's easy. The easiest thing in any project is buying the stuff, right? But because a lot of us have been in the camera world for a while, and me probably less than most of you listening in the digital camera world, we've already kind of learned the lesson about, and this is probably what's hurt some of the sales as well. We've kind of learned the lesson about buying gear that we maybe didn't completely need. And we look on the shelf. I mean, I look on my shelf and I feel guilty about how much money is sitting on that shelf. And I don't have a GH6. I don't have a full frame. And so people have learned that lesson. And so when it comes to the question of owning a GH6, they balk at the hurdle. Now, prices have come down a lot, so that hurdle is way lower than it used to be. In fact, I didn't think the GH6 was really worth the price when it came out. In Australian dollars, it was, I think, with the kit lens, well over 4,000, and just under 4,000 without the kit lens, which is right up there with it's a few $100s away from like a Sony, the latest Sony full frame at the time. Prices are now about 2,700 for just the camera body. The cheapest I've seen them is about 2,200, where you kind of have overlapping specials, or maybe an open box, new open box. So price barriers reduced. I assume the CF Express cards are getting cheaper, but I don't actually know for sure. But even so, are people jumping in to buy this camera? They're just not. I think there's just this trickle of sales. I am starting to see, more people make content about it. So clearly there's an ownership out there, but it's just not a camera that a lot of people feel they can justify. And again, I don't want to get into the technicals. I think the problem this camera has is that the technicals were already really good for the GH5, GH5 Mark II. And people never stop to really analyze that and think, hold on, what on earth is a GH6 going to provide? Does anyone care if it goes above 4K? Does anyone really need 120 FPS at 4K? Not really. And as for the vertical aspect ratio that you can pull out of the 5.7K, you can do that anyway off 4K footage. If you're playing it on a phone, 4K still gives you a good amount of vertical resolution. And there is a open gate mode on the GH5. It's called anamorphic. So it's kind of I think people were sort of searching and maybe again looking in at themselves and saying, hold on, what was I really expecting? Because of course 4K is all I need. Okay, maybe there's like some little red borders that show me the framing. That's all pretty convenient. I'm guessing they could do that on the firmware upgrade for their other cameras. Panasonic's pretty good with firmware, but I feel like they do hold some things back to try and make you buy the next model. So, yeah, I kind of wonder as well if this is going to be a bit of a like Panasonic could go in like two or three or four different directions with whatever comes next. Do they actually take a step back and say, hold on, we want an awesome M43 4K camera, but let's face it, not everyone needs 5.7K. Not everyone needs this hulking frame rate and this huge camera with a fan to support it. What if we just had something that was more like a GH5? It would have better battery life, it'd be more compact, it'd be a little bit cheaper. What if we put phase detect in it and we gave it all the good firmware so we can select the framing windows, and there are a lot of quality of life things they could do to help maybe put some buttons inside different places, and kept all of the really good like non-cropping and unlimited time frames, and they just basically made a refined, I don't know what they'd call it. I mean, I don't want to say just a refined GH5. There may be room for improving the bit rate. I'm not 100% sure how all that works, but wouldn't there be a market? Wouldn't people maybe who aren't like thinking of themselves as like professional content producers, wouldn't maybe some of those people prefer that kind of camera? Because it's kind of like if you make the GH series too massive in every sense of the word, Do you risk driving people over to Olympus, or OM Systems as they're unfortunately now called? Panasonic is on the cusp of becoming the number one. Definitely, they're already overtaken Olympus, but are they like, are they going to mess this up? Um, at the moment, they're still on track to do really well with the phase detect coming out in the S5 Mark II. But what are they going to do with M43? If the GH6 sort of fails commercially because they took it too far, and you end up with these, like, I don't know, like, I think they say there might be a new G9 coming out in a few days, and I just wonder, like, if M43 is just when everyone thought that this is going to be around forever, if maybe the GH6 turns out to be the pinnacle, which would be really unfortunate. It'd also make the camera like extra special if that is what happens. But, I feel like, so in a way, like, I'm saying keep going with development at the high end, but maybe you give that type of camera a different name. And by the way, I hate these letters and numbers names. Just call it, a penguin or a puffin or a tiger or a beetle. So you give it a cool name. Don't just put a letter and a number there. Like Olympus is even worse. Continue something with a GH6, GH line, which is really general and has wide appeal, but doesn't go over the top. And then, you have something that's more suitable for the, like, real genuine professional users. So yeah, the GH6 is like, how do you really come to grips with this thing? I think that in a year from now, people will still be asking these questions. Maybe we'll get some resolution when the next one comes out. They're saying this next camera is probably G9 Mark II. Some are saying it's going to be the GH7, but the GH6 has only been out for a year and a half, and it was a long time coming. It would be interesting if it turned out the GH6 didn't have a long production life because sales weren't great, and Panasonic said, look, we've got to risk, we can either sit on the GH6 for the next 2 more years and not have very good sales, or we can come up with a GH7 a year ahead of schedule, maybe dump it on the market at the end of 2024 at the latest, and that has the phase detect. Whether or not they scale back the size or anything like that, I don't know. But you might find, I'm just saying, there's an argument, there's a business case if the theory that sales are not so great for the GH6 to get a move on with a GH7. I don't give a flying damn about the autofocus system. I shoot vintage lenses most of the time. But a lot of people do. It's just sort of, and maybe this is something that, really, I think people got so sick of the autofocus discussion that they kind of tuned out. And again, there was an impetus to look within rather than to look at what other people were saying. The other thing that happened with the GH6 is when it came out, like, it went to different YouTubers, and maybe this happened before then, but it seemed like with the GH6, that's when this YouTuber marketing went full throttle, and suddenly the predictable channels, you all know who they are. They all got the camera in advance, and on release day, they all released videos about it. And don't get me wrong, some of those videos were really cool, but some of it was just like, when all your favorite channels do the same thing on the same day, and they all have the same, like, avatars or icons or thumbnails with the camera and the person looking at it and pointing at it funny and putting a stupid face, and it's kind of funny. But that's when you sort of realize, hang on, everyone's doing this. I'm being played. I'm a sheep in the herd, right? Like, I get that YouTube is full of marketing, but when it's so in your face and just very non-organic, yeah. So the GH6, I think, marked the turning point, and I've seen it since with other, like the S5 Mark II. It was exactly the same thing. In fact, even worse. And I don't blame the camera channels. Like, it's hard to make money on YouTube. I know that, and you get an opportunity to, maybe you're not getting paid, but you at least know you're going to get a really high-ranking video by being one of a select group. But yeah, there is something a little off-putting about the way camera marketing takes place in the modern world. So the Panasonic GH6, the dust hasn't really settled. I don't know that it is going to settle. I don't know if we need a GH7 to really work out what the GH6 is. I don't know if you need to own one. I mean, I feel like I enjoy the camera, and this is the whole thing about camera ownership. You start to enjoy the camera before you buy it. The experience, it's not just taking photos. People say, oh, a new camera won't help you take better photos. I mean, it's not just about taking photos anymore. Like, we're all part of an online community or ecosystem of people. Most of us aren't great photographers or videographers, but we're all enjoying the drama, the camera drama. Um, we love to talk about this stuff. We love to listen to other people talk about this stuff. I mean, I can binge watch GH6 videos. And the other thing was, I don't want to go into the technicals too much, but there was this streaking. There are a couple of issues actually with the GH6, and one was this streaking issue. And it seems like, at the very least, it is a minor but not insignificant issue or problem. Look, not everyone is filming bright sunlit windows in a dark room, and if you are, you should probably ask yourself, what the fuck are you doing with that scene? But I've seen footage filmed around a campfire. It was very organic. It could have been a great scene from a movie. And someone had a lamp now walking around the campfire, and you had really epic streaking from the lamp. And the lamp wasn't even super bright. Like, it wouldn't have been as bright as a sunlit window. But it's that combination of light and dark in the same frame that seems to do it. And it was obvious. I've taken a bit of a philosophical view about the streaking, and I actually am not bothered by it. I don't want to say I discount it, and if another GH camera came out that didn't have that issue, I might err towards that. It might even make me go towards the GH5 Mark II, which I don't have. I've got the Mark 1. I've also got a GH5S. But in the history of, like, the moving picture, there's always been artifacts of the technology, right? You have grain in film, you have scratches from the processing of the celluloid, dust specks, you have tracking issues in VHS, horizontal rastering issues with TV, snow with TV. You remember snow on the analog televisions, and the hiss, and you have pixelation on early digital footage, and faded film, and all these things which at the time might have annoyed technical people, but there wasn't an internet community to sort of blow it up out of proportion like there is now. But I think we look back almost with fondness at these artifacts. It almost puts our brains in a place where we're more susceptible to storytelling. And the artifacts can even add sort of an unintentionally artistic element. And I think one day we'll look back and we'll see some streaking and sort of say, oh, it's, that was filmed with a GH6 and that was the technology back in 2022 or whatever. And it happens with other cameras to some extent as well, just not that obviously. And, it'll be sort of charming. So I wouldn't worry if you have a GH6, I really wouldn't worry about it. It's just that I think the reason it's still an interesting talking point is because how did they let the camera out of the development, given it is a pretty obvious problem, and people are looking for talking points in social media, and once something gets picked up, an inch gets turned into a mile. People want to get mileage out of saying the same thing over and over. That's why the autofocus thing became so fucking boring. And yeah, so it was an interesting little drama there. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with the next GH camera. I kind of hope one comes out next year. Either a GH6S or a GH7 or even a GH6 Mark II. Like I said, if they were on the ball business-wise, they might try and bring ahead the schedule. I feel like, though, if I had bought a GH6, I bought a GH5 just like, I think literally days before the Mark II was announced. And I had a feeling that would happen, but I stopped putting it off and I bought it. And, should have waited another week. But you will get some people pissed off who bought the GH6 if a GH6 Mark II comes out. I think GH6S is a completely different camera. And that'll be fascinating to see what they can do with that. And because the GH6, the low light's actually not as good as the GH5S, but some say it's significantly better than the GH5. I'm not so sure. I've seen some pretty bad low light footage for the GH6. I'm talking about real footage of a real scene. I have seen some test footage of just like black screens and grey screen. I don't think that's an ideal way to test low light. But there was a gentleman who was filming a cityscape on a cloudy evening with GH6 and the GH5S, and GH5S was just dramatically better. So if a GH6S comes out, that'll be a really interesting one. GH5S went out of production recently. They said it was just, was it because they couldn't get the part? I can't remember, but it was portrayed as being a temporary thing. But it could be just that they're gearing up for a GH6S. That would make sense. So anyway, that's the GH6. We're still looking for closure. We don't really deserve it. It is an amazing camera. It may turn out to be the pinnacle of M4.3. It may be a camera that those who rejected it when it came out suddenly want one 5 years later. And I'll keep following the GH6 story. Because I think there are multiple unwritten chapters. I will continually keep an eye on the prices. If I can pick one up for less than 2,000 Australian, and I have more time to put into video and photography, and I maybe sell some of my other photography gear, then I might buy one. I'm trying to hold off buying equipment for the rest of 2023. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But thank you for watching this. I hope it was interesting. By all means, leave a comment or even make your own G6 video. I love to watch just discussion videos that aren't, in the technical weeds on this camera, whether it's about a problem or just general views or the market, or what it really means, or are you happy with it, are you not happy with it, are you thinking about buying one. I love the GH6 saga. So I'll leave it there, and I might see you in another video sometime.